When you read the newspapers and even watch the news channels, you must have often come across a word called sanctions. What is this word called sanction? It can be a financial sanction, economic sanction, a political sanction, diplomatic sanction, military sanction, and even a sports sanction. There are many types of sanctions. So imagine that United States of America has imposed a sanction on Iran, or the European Union has imposed a sanction on Russia, or the United Nations Security Council has imposed a sanction on a group of countries. So if such a sanction is in place, what is the impact that the countries have to face? So why do you need a sanction? What are the countries trying to prove? So there are a lot of questions regarding these sanctions. So we'll explain all this in LearnStroke's ExplainWallah with Arjun or Shaankar. We have already discussed about sanctions and different type of sanctions. So the key question comes here: what is sanction? You must understand that sanction can be a group or a set of penalties or an effective tool that one country uses to regulate or punish other countries. So as I said, the word penalty, it can be a set of penalties that one country imposes upon the other countries for an international wrongdoing. Imagine that a country has imposed a sanction on one country, and the country upon which the sanction is imposed must have done an international wrongdoing, say a human rights violation, human rights abuses, or it must have conducted genocides or improper handling of nuclear sources or even terrorism. So if that is an international problem to a group of countries, they will impose, if it is an economic sanction, they will definitely impose some penalties or regulations upon the country which has done the wrongdoing. So this is the concept of sanctions or economic sanctions, and what are the repercussions that can take place if a country put on sanction, especially the economic sanction. I can give you an illustration. Let's illustrate. Imagine that I'm a country, let's take the country called X. There is a country called X, and this country has gone to war with another country and is not handling its nuclear sources properly, and there is a possible reference of terrorism, nuclear terrorism that can happen from this country called X. And you see that there are other countries, bigger countries, United Nations at this juncture, who take a decision that we are going to impose a sanction on this country called X. And we are imposing an economic sanction, so penalties are going to come up. What will happen in this case? So you know that a group of countries, let's call it Y. There can be many countries, a group of countries called Y are putting a sanction on X. What are the likely repercussions that will happen here? You will see that there is going to be an asset freeze. When you see that the sanction has come, it is not only for the country alone. Sanctions can be for the country, not alone for the president or the prime minister or the parliament. It can for just for the country. It is for the business houses, the government, and even for the people, individual. Sanctions can apply to all. So Y has applied sanctions on X. This is the scenario that we have. Let's see what can happen. The first thing that can happen is travel ban. Complete travel ban can happen. You cannot travel to all the countries called Y who are imposing sanction. And then the most important word called the trade embargo. What do you mean by an embargo? Embargo is a set where you have a commerce restriction between few countries. So if there is a trade embargo, that means you cannot have trade with the countries called Y. It will be very difficult. So there will be trade embargo, trade restrictions, travel ban, asset freezes, and complete cutoff of diplomatic and all foreign relations or financial relations with the countries called Y. And what can really happen out of this? Imagine that the country called X, we are a very moderately, a medium-sized economy or a medium country with an average per capita income. So basically we are a developing country or even an underdeveloped country with not self-sustaining economy. So we are dependent on so many countries for our trade, export, lot of factors for running this country. That means we are dependent on so many countries, and the countries that happened to impose the restrictions, like the Y countries, we are heavily dependent on those countries for our trade, sustenance, etc. What will happen? Travel ban, very difficult. We will not be able to travel to all these countries. We'll be hardly hit. Trade restrictions. We cannot trade with all these countries. We cannot export. And the most important things will not come from this country. We'll be heavily hit. Asset freezes will happen. And they can even cut down the defense technology that we were used to getting. They can cut down the security. They can cut down the military help, even broadcast, internet, aviation. Our flights will not be able to land in many of the airports of the Y countries. And our aircrafts will suffer badly from that. People will not be able to move. What is happening? This is the real impact of a financial sanction, because the Y countries are very powerful countries and we depend on this country. If they impose such sanction, it is literally very, very difficult to survive under this condition. So this happened to a normal, medium developing or an underdeveloped country. And what if the scenario, just imagine that being an ex-country, we are very, very self-reliant and we self-sustain. We have huge resources ourselves. Even though we have trade with Y, we are super power in making, and we are a strong country with strong resources. What is the result of a sanction here? In this scenario, we should always note that the country or a group of country which are imposing the sanction, because you can see that if one country imposes a sanction, it is called as a unilateral sanction. And if the different countries together, in this case Y, it's a group of countries, you can call it as a unilateral or a multilateral sanction, because there are different countries involved in this. When they impose a sanction upon us, we are also a very powerful country. In that case, you can see that the country which imposes a sanction will also have a big time loss on that, because we are not affected. There is a travel ban, there is a trade restriction, trade embargo. We are not getting the defense technology, the arms from this country, but still we are powerful. Few restrictions are happening from this country. We are self-sufficient in trading to another countries in different parts of the world. So that means as a strong country, we are not affected by the sanction of the Y countries. So such scenarios have also existing in the modern day. So sanctions, when a country imposes, doesn't mean that you can crush that country. If that country is a very vulnerable country, definitely you can crush it. If the country is a strong, dynamic power, you will not see that kind of a impact on that country. So this is an illustration. So out of this illustration, I'm sure you must have understood the different concepts of how sanctions can really work out. So now we have discussed about sanction, and you know what is the power of sanction and how can sanction really crush a country, and what are the important implications that sanctions can really bring in. So the key question comes here: is sanctions a new concept? Then we can understand that, because every now and then we see that United States of America has put a sanction on Iran. They have put sanctions on Syria. They have put sanctions on Russia, and even European Union has put sanctions on many countries. And so is this a new concept? There is a small history involved in this, and when we understand this concept of sanction, we really understand that this is as old as the First World War. In the time of League of Nations, after League of Nations, United Nations came in. Even at the time of the League of Nations during the First World War, there were instances of sanctions. And during the Abyssinian crisis, a sanction was imposed upon Mussolini's Italy. So, and after that, even the United Nations Security Council has imposed a lot of sanctions, over 40 plus sanctions in different parts of the country when they first put a sanction on Zimbabwe. Many of the sanctions were taken back, and even more than 14 to 15 sanctions still exist in many countries. So that is the history that has gone into this. And in the recent, what is the current affair aspect regarding this? Everybody knows that Russia is targeted heavily. A lot of countries, including US, European Union, everybody is targeting Russia, and a lot of sanctions are in place for Russia here. And what are the so-called implications that Russia will have? I said, remember the illustration that I just told you. In this case, you know that the group of countries like US, European Union are in the Y category, and in the X being Russia. In this category, you know that Russia is not a small power. Russia is again a very strong power. So the impact on Russia, according to various reports, even Vladimir Putin has said that Russia will not have that much of an impact when you put sanctions on that. But still, we can see that There has been sanctions in defense, the technologies, and especially in the energy sector, because Russia and the power of oil. Russia depends heavily on oil and refinery. So a lot of equipments for this sector, for energy sector, supplied by the European Union after the trade sanction has come in. People say that Russia is going to suffer because there is going to be a sanction and implication in the energy, defense, and even the air connectivity in the aviation sector. Many raw materials or parts for the aviation industry is stopped, and Russia will not be able to land its aircraft in many of the countries. So these are the sanctions which Russia is going to face. But the key problem is, if a country is very strong, they can insulate themselves from the bitter experiences and bitter shocks of sanctions. So this is the small idea about sanctions, and in short about the financial or the economic sanctions that can be put on the country. So I think we have discussed almost all the important aspects that a sanctions can bring in to a country.